Mark chapter 5. Today we're going to look at a passage in the Gospel of Mark that I believe shows Jesus' compassion, also shows us that we all have access by faith to Jesus Christ. I think this passage might contain one of the most heart-touching episodes in the Gospel. But we're also going to see that I think it's also got a sort of a hidden insight. If we begin to see how people respond to Jesus. If you've noticed going through the Gospel of Mark, one of the common threads is how do people respond to Jesus? Who is Jesus? How do people understand him? And how do they respond to him? And that is a guidebook for us to understand Jesus and to know how to respond to him. And so we're gonna have a really unique story here. So in the Gospel of Mark, Mark does something. He does it several times. And I call it Mark's sandwiches. There's a scholarly term for it, but I prefer to just say it's Mark's sandwiches. And so what he does is he'll have a story, then he'll break the story, and he'll have another story, and then he'll come back to the main story. And that's what you have here, and this is actually how it happened. You have an interruption. Jesus is on his way to perform a miracle, and he has an interruption, performs another miracle. So I want to take a look at this passage today, and we're going to see two things contrasted. Number one, we're going to see what it looks like to have faith in Jesus and to see him amaze us at his response. And then we're going to look and see what it is to have an unbelief that is amazing to Jesus himself. So I want to take a look at this, and the first thing I want to see is that anyone can touch Jesus' heart with sincere faith. No one is too far away from the Lord. No one has too many barriers away from the Lord, but faith breaks down the barriers. And I want you to see that today as we have two different people from two different situations, two different contexts that both come to Jesus by faith. Let's look here in verse 21. Mark chapter 5, verse 21. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with him. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had, and was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard the reports about Jesus, and came up behind him in the crowd, and touched his garment. For she said, "If I touch even his garments, I will be made well." Now you have two people here. You have a broken man and a bleeding woman who both need what Jesus has to offer, and they both, coming from two different points of reference, they come to Jesus by faith. Now what you notice here is that sickness and death equalize across all class, race, social, wealth lines. You have here a man named Jairus, and he is a ruler of a synagogue. He is a leading official that ruled over a local house of worship. He would have been a man who had some position. He would have been a man who was very religious. He would have been a man who was wealthy. He was important. And I want you to notice that he comes to Jesus publicly and implores Jesus earnestly and tells him that his daughter is dying. And he knows that if Jesus will come and lay his hands on her, she'll be made well. The word there is literally saved, that she will be saved alive. But then, as Jesus is traveling with this man, and his company, his fan club, if you will, are around him, pressing in around him, there's this woman who has gone unnoticed. Now, I want you to notice a few things. She doesn't even get a name. We don't even know her name. She doesn't come publicly. She comes in secret. And she comes to Jesus because she has a discharge of blood or a hemorrhage, or different translations render it different ways. Basically, what this woman had was she had most likely a menstrual hemorrhage that just continued for 12 years. She had this condition. Now, a few things about that is, according to the Old Testament, that would render a woman unclean. So, ladies, if you read your Old Testament and you read about some of the laws, the things that inconvenience you now would have inconvenienced you a lot more if you were in the Old Testament. But she would be unclean. And as long as this persisted, and it had persisted for 12 years, she would be unclean. She would be similar to a leper. Whoever she touched, whatever she touched, would be rendered unclean. She would not be allowed to be a part of worship. She would be an outcast by no fault of her own, by no sin or by no wrongdoing, simply by the circumstances that her body and her poor health have put upon her. She was ostracized. This is no doubt the reason that she wanted to come privately, because she didn't want to draw attention. Maybe she also didn't want to be rushed away or told to leave Jesus alone. And you'll notice that her desire is to touch Jesus' garment. I want you to notice that both of these people, Jairus and this unnamed woman, both believe in the power of Jesus' touch. Jairus says, if you will come and lay your hand on my daughter, she will live. And this woman says, if I'm able to only lay my hand on his garment, I will be made well. And there may be here even a sensitivity that she doesn't want to touch Jesus and spread this ceremonial uncleanness, so maybe she's just going to touch his garment. So you see this man who has this platform and this ability to come publicly and to make this request, and Jesus is going. But you see this woman who does not feel the same social access or maybe social credibility to be able to approach Jesus this way. And you have two people coming to Jesus. They have contrasting scenarios, but they're coming to Jesus by faith. Jairus would have been an important man. This woman, we don't even know her name. Jairus was a religious leader. He was at the synagogue, and he was organizing things at the synagogue. He would have been more than likely an administrator of the synagogue. And this woman would not be able to attend. She would not even be able to worship. Jairus was probably wealthy, or at least had above average means. We read that this woman had spent everything she had on doctors trying to remedy her condition, and that she was bankrupt. She had spent all that she had, and she had gotten no better, but she had only gotten worse. And folks, that ought to go to show you that some of the problems we have in our in our medical system are some of the problems they had back then. I mean, even today with our modern technologies, there are some things that it just seems like are chronic or unexplainable. But this woman is spending all that she has to be well. Another thing that maybe some of you all who are familiar with these kind of things might also put together is this woman was likely barren. She was likely infertile because of her condition. So not only was this woman an outcast, she was denied the privilege. We don't even know if she was married. She is here alone. But she was denied not only many social privileges, she no doubt was denied a lot of personal goals and dreams. For her to rectify this situation would have changed her life immensely. Her life would have been almost like a resurrection from the dead. And this man comes publicly, she comes privately, and they both want Jesus' touch. And I want you to notice a few things. The differences are significant, but both of them are desperate. Both of them are at the end of their rope. This woman is bankrupt. She has no more money. This man says his daughter is at the point of death. She is dying now. They're both of them at the very end of their resources, of their wits, of anything in their own human agency. And they turn to Jesus as their only hope. Both of them come to Jesus by faith. This man says, I know that if you will lay your hand on my daughter, I know she will live. This man is not hoping against hope. This man is not rolling the dice. This man knows that his daughter is dying, but this man can save her. And this woman believes, firmly believes it, that if she can just get to Jesus and press through the crowd, that she could be healed. Now, I don't want to over-accentuate the differences here. They come from two different backgrounds, two different situations. The man, no doubt, was more privileged just in his life situation than this woman was. But I don't want to set up some sort of a classism or anything like that. Because you cannot be too poor to come to Jesus, and you can't be too rich to come to Jesus. You can't be too impoverished or too privileged. Everyone can come to Jesus, but we must come by faith, and we must come believing in Him and trusting in Him. But there's also something important in their posture. I want you to notice. Sickness and death equalize the playing field. At the chemotherapy center, there will be poor people, there will be rich people, there will be people of all means. There will be people of all races, there will be people of all classes. And you know what they have in common? That they are at the mercy of God and the doctors. Someone with more wealth may have a little more cushion, maybe have some better resources, but at the end of the day, terminal is terminal. At the end of the day, barren is barren. At the end of the day, broke is broke. These two, coming to Jesus from different contexts, are both coming as beggars. Here's the thing, folks. Sickness and death make beggars out of all of us. Shows us how little we have, how little we can do, and how much we need Jesus. At the end of the day, when we realize what our great need is, we all come before Jesus with empty hands, trusting Him. Not only in a time of need, but the gospel equalizes the playing field. No one comes to Jesus proud to receive salvation. No one believes the gospel with a haughty heart. No one receives Jesus and is proud of how smart they were that they put the gospel together. In order for you to come to Christ, you have to accept the premise of the gospel, and that is this. It's that God is holy, and that you are a sinner who has broken His law. And apart from His salvation, you will be eternally lost from Him. No one comes to that message proud. No one comes to that message rich. No one comes to that message more privileged than the other. We all come before God humbly as beggars, needing only what He can give. And folks, let me tell you, if we have trouble seeing that, circumstances can show us that more than anything. And that's where these people are at. That's where this man and this woman are at, from two different spheres. But they are standing on the level playing field of tragedy, sickness, and death, and they're coming to Jesus out of desperation. Another thing, too, the public nature of this woman, she's going to be exposed. I don't want to say exposed in a negative light, but she's coming privately, but she's not going to stay private. Both of these people are also identifying with Jesus. This woman is having to come out of ostracization. She is risking exposure. She is risking ridicule. She is risking shame to press through this crowd of people. Surely there would be someone there who knows her, who says, "What are you doing here?" Surely there'll be someone there who sees her and says maybe she should go home. She is stepping out in faith, and she is not letting social barriers, she's not letting literal barriers of people hinder her. She is determined to press through by faith and reach Jesus. But I want to point something out about this synagogue ruler as well. This was a man who was a religious leader. He would have been an administrator of a synagogue. Now, I don't know, and you don't know, and it's not given to us how Jairus' orientation to Jesus was before this. But I can tell you this, Jesus was a lightning rod, and most religious elites did not like him. We have seen the scribes say that he was possessed by a demon. We've seen the Pharisees say that he's a blasphemer. This man would have been very, very close to a lot of people who hated Jesus. And he held a position, and his pay, his job, was tied to his credibility as a religious leader at a synagogue. And whether he had before this moment or not, he was now taking a public position on who Jesus was. I mean, we all do that, don't we? Don't we all hold our cards close to the vest if it's going to cost us? Like, you don't go out and just tell all your opinions to everybody, or you would offend everyone, right? You know, even if you've got a really, if you've got an opinion about a controversial topic, maybe political or whatever, you know, you don't go around broadcasting that unless you're somebody you just loves fighting. I don't know Jairus' specific, situation. Maybe he had been a believer in Jesus. I don't know. But I know this. He occupied a place in the religious life of Israel that how he felt and voiced about Jesus was a very, very sensitive thing. It very well may be that this is his walking down the aisle ceremony. Using my sanctified imagination, it's plausible that this man heretofore has not weighed in on who Jesus is. But he realizes this man can heal. He realizes this man is the only hope for his daughter. And in this moment, whatever his position has been, positive, negative, or neutral about Jesus, it doesn't matter. All that matters is that his daughter is dying, and this man, Jesus, can save her. The public fallout can be what it will, but in this moment, he says, if you will come to my home and lay your hands on my daughter, I know she will live. And everyone comes to Jesus this same way. No cards close to the vest, no more chips, no more bargaining. When you come to Jesus, you come to him as the only one who can save, as the only one who can answer. That's how they both come. They both come desperate and in faith and believing. But I want you to notice here, Jairus has come first. And arguably, his need is greater. His daughter is dying. This woman, as bad as her situation is, she's made it 12 years, she can make it 5 more minutes. But she comes through the crowd, and look in verse 29. And immediately, when she touches him, she said, we see here in verse 27, she came behind Jesus and touched his garment, for she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. I don't have to touch him. I don't have to risk making him unclean. If I can just touch his garment, I know that I'll be made well. And we read in verse 29 that immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Now, the whole time, Jairus is anxious. He's waiting. He's knowing that this man can help his daughter. He realizes that something else has happened, but he's waiting. Jesus is dealing with this woman. He could have kept going. He could have kept moving on and said, okay, well, whatever happened, happened. I've got to go to Jairus' house. But he stops, and he asks this bizarre question, who touched my clothes? And his disciples say, Master, there's dozens of people pressing in. It's like walking through an airport. You're bumping into everybody. How everybody's touching your clothes, Jesus? What do you mean? And he says, no, power went out from me. This woman felt that she was healed, and Jesus felt that she was healed. And Jesus is not going to move on until he confronts the person that touched him. And you can almost feel the woman's anxiety as Jesus starts this line of inquiry. Hey, who touched me? Who touched me? You know, almost like a child when a parent says, all right, which one of you broke this thing? And like, okay, you know, but more serious. This is Jesus, the man who heals, the Messiah. And she doesn't know if she's in trouble. She doesn't know if she's going to be in trouble for violating cleanliness laws or what. But he exposes and he says, who touched me? He looked around to see who had done it. And notice this woman, she knows what had happened to her. She knows that she's been healed. She thought she could do this secretly and keep on going and nobody would be any the wiser. She didn't need recognition. She didn't want recognition. But when she realized that she was found out, she came in fear and trembling and she fell down before him. Now what you'll notice there, if you go back and look at Jairus when he came to Jesus, we read that he fell down at Jesus' feet begging him. You see, we all have the same posture before Jesus. This woman thinks she's going to be shamed. This woman thinks she's going to be exposed. This woman thinks that she's going to be treated as she has been treated. Now, I want you to notice what Jesus says to her. He calls her out and he points her out for a reason that is good for her. And he says to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. Now, she was already healed and she knew she was healed. What does this add? It adds at least two things. Number one, no one comes to Jesus privately. And what I mean by that is this. You don't get to just have some personal faith in Jesus and keep it to yourself and hide it under a bushel, yes. In the New Testament, baptism is the unveiling ceremony for any Christian. It's in so much that when you read the New Testament, it's as though some people get confused and think that baptism is actually the moment of salvation. But when you read the New Testament, there's no separation between salvation and baptism. Now, we don't believe that baptism saves. We believe that we're saved by faith. But we believe that baptism is so important as it's as though, I liken it to a wedding band. Like, what would it say about me if I chose on my next trip that I flew away from Katrina, I chose not to wear my wedding band? Well, that would say so many things about me, wouldn't it? But baptism was seen as the coming out ceremony of a new Christian. And in a context where in the early church people would be persecuted, for you to be baptized was to stake your claim and to say, all right, here it is. Just like Jairus. What does this synagogue official think about Jesus? Well, everybody knows now. And the same thing is true of this woman. I think that Jesus identified her publicly because her faith needed to be public. It needed to be associated with Jesus. She didn't just need to go her way and be healed somehow. Now, you may have different opinions about the man, but one of my great heroes of the faith was Billy Graham. And you criticize him all you want, but there are a lot of people that know Jesus because of that man's preaching, and he's one of my heroes of the faith. And he used to, at the end of every of his sermons, he would have this invitation, and they would be evangelistic, and he would ask people to come. And, we can criticize altar calls and all of that, but do you know why he called people to come forward? And he would always say this. He would say, Jesus died for you publicly, and you need to believe on him publicly. Now, whether we do altar calls like a Billy Graham crusade or whether we don't, the logic holds. You cannot be a secret Christian. There's no such thing. You cannot be a secret believer. Doesn't exist. And if you say I'm saved by faith, but I refuse to identify with Jesus in baptism or by following him or by church attendance, I challenge the fact that you know Jesus. Because if you know Jesus, you love Jesus. And if you love Jesus, you obey Jesus. This woman, just like Jairus, is identified with Jesus in this moment. But I want you to notice something here. This is not a shaming ritual. This is not a pay your dues sort of a thing. There's something else this woman really needed. And maybe she needed this more than the healing itself. She needed to be seen and accepted. She had been rejected for 12 years of her life. Relationships closed down, social circles shut off, childbearing impossible. And Jesus looks at her and he calls her daughter. Jairus says to Jesus, "Come, Jesus, my little daughter is at the point of death." And what does Jesus do? He pauses for this unseen, adult, unclean woman, and he says, "You are as precious as this man's little girl. And you are seen, and you are important, and you are loved." No one comes to Jesus and gets a second-rate salvation. No one comes to Jesus and gets a B-plan answered prayer. There are no stepchildren in God's family. This woman is just as seen, is just as important, is just as precious, and is just as seen and heard as this notable man who we know by name. We don't have her name, but God knows her name. Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace, in wholeness, and be healed of your disease. This woman went home not with some private, stolen healing. She went home a daughter of God, seen, loved, and accepted. And don't miss this. Her uncleanness defiled everything it touched. But when uncleanness touches Jesus, it does not defile him. He cleanses the uncleanness. That's the only person that cleanness flows the other way. The same is true for you and for me. Jesus cleanses us of our sin. Now, let's keep on going. What happens next? We'll look in verse 35. While he was still speaking, and notice, maybe he said more to this woman. He's still speaking to her. He's still seeing her. He's still acknowledging her. And while he's still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." Folks, I don't know what this man felt in that moment. He knew his daughter was dying. He got to Jesus. He begged him to come. And then on the way, he gets interrupted. And you can't fault him, and you can't fault this poor woman. But maybe in his mind he thought, man, if only she could have waited. Maybe we could have got to my daughter in time. What terrible, terrible timing. And Jesus looks at him and says, "Do not fear, only believe." And so he allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." Jesus has totally reframed the situation. What happens? And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside, and he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age. And they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. I love how that story ends. I mean, this girl has just died, and it ends, and Jesus is like, "Hey, she's hungry. Give her something to eat." I mean, that's just the wildest note to end on, isn't it? Because, why is it? Because everything has been restored to ordinary. When we go through trials, when we go through loss, man, we long for ordinary, don't we? Man, just to have a boring, mundane day some days. You know, I think when you're a kid, you want adventure and you want excitement and you want... I think as you get older, you're like, give me a boring day any day. Because you know what adventure costs and what it looks like. But after all of this, it ends on just such a beautiful note. Hey, she's hungry, guys. Give her something to eat. Look at what she's been through. I don't know what death and resurrection does for you, but I think if anything could work up an appetite, that would probably do it. But here they come into the home. Jesus says she's sleeping, and they come into the house. And notice you have mourners. And in the Jewish culture, you didn't only have people who loved you that came and mourned. You would actually hire mourners. Now, I know that sounds weird to us, but it was part of, there's an honor in mourning. Like the greater the mourning, the greater the honor. And so you would actually hire people that would come in with like musical instruments, and they would pipe or flute and whatever, and you'd have these dirges that would be sung. I know that doesn't exactly fit what we do, but that was the case. Mourning was a big deal. It was a professional enterprise. And you have these people who have come in. Some maybe are loved ones, and some maybe are just people who've come to, perform. And they're mourning, and they're weeping, and they're wailing, which is what they're supposed to be doing. But when Jesus says she's only asleep, the mourners turn into a sitcom audience, and they start laughing. But before the day is done, the mourners have gone from mourning to laughing to having jaw-dropping amazement. Jesus changes the room. So he comes in and he puts the people out. And the word there for putting them out is the same word that's used for casting out demons. It's not saying they're demons, I don't think. Probably doesn't mean anything too special, but it does mean this, that unbelief can't stay in the room. So he puts them out. And he says to her in Aramaic, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately she got up, started walking. And how old is this girl? She's 12 years old. How long had that woman been sick? 12 years. Man, I tell you, I don't know what this father felt. I don't know what he felt. I can tell you right now, there's something about a little girl for her dad. You don't want her to skin her knee, much less see her cold. But man, when Jesus walked into the room and said, do not fear, only believe, and when he raises her up, and that 12-year-old girl gets up, and Jesus says, give her something to eat. What a day. What a day. Mourning turned to laughter, then laughter turned to rejoicing. Now, we've noticed a lot of differences between Jairus and this unnamed woman. But I think the similarities are more powerful than the differences. They show us the same faith. They show us the humble posture that faith demands. You cannot come to Jesus proud. You cannot come to Jesus arrogant. You cannot come to Jesus mad. You cannot come to Jesus with anything on the table. You come just like these people did, with nothing. Faith requires that you identify with Jesus. I'll tell you what, folks. This woman, she probably got sick with something else. She probably got a cold at some point. And at some point, she got sick and died, or she just died. This 12-year-old girl hopefully lived a beautiful life into old age, but eventually, guess what? She died, one of the few people in the world to have 2 funerals. But I'll tell you something that marked them for eternity was their connection to Jesus. From this moment on, Jairus and his family and this little girl were Jesus' people. And so was this woman who was healed. Faith requires that you identify with Jesus, and frankly, faith requires that you believe the impossible. Sometimes I think we scale faith down. Sometimes I think we mitigate our faith. We're so afraid of believing something that doesn't happen, or we're so afraid of praying something that won't happen, or we're so afraid of being mistaken for some prosperity gospel heretic that I think we hedge our prayer life and our faith so much that we really don't believe anything anymore. But church, Jesus does the impossible. Nothing is off the table with Jesus. Now, I know this is not our experience. We don't go around and breaking up funerals. I know that doesn't happen. I know that not every disease Jesus heals. He didn't heal every disease here. But let me tell you something. when you come to Jesus, you have to come believing in Him and believing that He rewards faith and that nothing is impossible to Him. And I think sometimes in our worrying and our fretting, we show more atheism than we do Christianity. We ask Jesus to do things that we think might be easy for Him. We ask Jesus to do things that won't amaze anybody. But when is the last time you asked Jesus for something that would amaze you? When is the last time that you asked Jesus for something that when He would do it would be a powerful testimony? Folks, let me tell you, there is the ditch of falling into bad theology, name it, claim it, nonsense. But there's an equally dangerous ditch of living just, quite frankly, an earthly life with a Christian veneer that has no faith, no belief, no prayer, no courageous acting. What we need is a faith that causes us to press through the crowd, a faith that causes us to take a bold stand, identify with Jesus, and ask Him for the impossible. Pillar Church, that's exactly what we need. Now, all of this entire story drives home one thing, and I want you to take this one thing. It's what I started with. It's that anyone can touch Jesus by faith. And don't miss the compassion of Jesus here. This has to be one of the most compassionate stories that you read in the Gospels. And I think it shines when He addresses this woman and He calls her daughter. We have a compassionate Savior who is touched by your hurting, who is touched by your tragedy, who is touched by your pain. And a broken heart, reaching out in faith, touches the heart of Jesus every time. And no one has a barrier that prevents them from reaching Jesus. But that's not where I want to stop. You thought it was. I actually want to keep going just a little bit. Anyone can touch Jesus by faith, but no one will receive anything from Jesus in unbelief. Look in chapter 6. You might say, "No, Pastor, you've already read the story. You're going to preach another sermon." No, I'm not. Listen. He went away from there and came to his hometown, and his disciples followed him. And on the Sabbath, he began to teach in the synagogue. And many who heard him were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? And are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. And Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his hometown and among his relatives and in his own household. And he could do no mighty work there, except that he laid his hands on a few sick people and healed them. And he marveled because of their unbelief." This episode complements the one that we've just seen. We've just seen an episode that shows us a compassionate Jesus that responds to faith, responds to imperfect faith, responds to timid faith, responds to cowardly faith, responds to secret faith. But he responds. And what does he do? He can heal people of life-threatening diseases. He can raise the dead. This is, until his own resurrection, this is the crescendo of Jesus' miracle ministry. He has raised the dead. It doesn't get bigger than that. And then he goes home to Nazareth on Sabbath, and he goes into a synagogue. He has just raised from the dead this synagogue ruler's daughter. But he enters into the synagogue that he grew up in, learning Torah in, and he begins to teach. And notice the first response. At first, they're astonished. Now, don't miss this. What happened when Jesus raised this girl from the dead? people were overcome with amazement. Now Jesus is teaching in his hometown synagogue, and people are likewise astonished. And they begin to ask, where did this man get these things? What is the wisdom given to him? How are such mighty works done by his hands? Those sound like neutral questions until they say, is not this the carpenter? Isn't this the tradesman? What's he doing teaching in the synagogue? Now, notice they've already acknowledged the mighty works. I don't know if they've gotten word about the resurrection or not, but they've gotten word of several things that he's done. And they begin to be offended at him. This is the only recorded trip back to Nazareth that we see in the Gospels. And this is the last time in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus will teach in a synagogue. This is the end of his synagogue ministry that's recorded. But I want you to notice the woman who reaches out to Jesus. He says, your faith has made you well. It's her faith. When he looks at Jairus, when his daughter has died, he says to him, don't be afraid, only have faith. And he comes to his hometown, where he is most well known, to the synagogue that he grew up in, going to Saturday school. And he can do no mighty works there because of their unbelief. Where there's faith, Jesus raises the dead. But where there's unbelief, his ministry stops. The carpenter, they call him. Notice this. The crowds, when he raised that girl from the dead, the Bible says the crowds were amazed. When he teaches in the synagogue, the Bible tells us that the Nazarenes were astonished or amazed. And then in verse 6, we find out that Jesus himself is amazed. He's amazed at their unbelief. It takes a lot to amaze Jesus. But the fact that they looked at his resurrection power, his cleansing power, his healing power, his teaching, and they looked at that and were offended by it, Jesus is speechless. He is marveling at their unbelief. And there's only a few sick people there that trust Jesus and allow him to heal them. On the heels of Jesus' greatest miracle, we're told that he only had a handful of people that believed him here in Nazareth. These two stories complement one another. You see a whirlwind of faith. You see a sandwich of faith. You see Jairus. You see this unnamed woman. You see their lives restored. You see their entire futures changed by faith. In Nazareth, you see Jesus completely rejected to the point that he can't even believe it. He's marveling at it because of how great their unbelief is. Church, the message is simply this. Come to Jesus, believing that he sees you. And Jesus will receive you regardless of your position, and he will respond to you according to your faith. The only way we can come to Jesus is by faith. The only way we can have assurance of answered prayer is by faith. The only way we can have assurance of salvation is by faith. With faith, nothing is impossible. Without faith, well, everything is impossible. Stand with us.